Meet Sister Margaret, a 72-year-old woman whose voice carries the weight of 3 decades of silence. Once a quiet young girl who entered a convent on the rolling hills of Pennsylvania, she became part of a small community of 5 women devoted to prayer, service, and faith. But behind the stone walls that promised sanctuary, a darker reality was waiting, one that would test their strength, shatter their innocence, and force them into a life of secrecy. Margaret's story is not only about survival, it is about courage, resilience, and the power of truth to rise after years of being buried. This channel, Grandma's Final Chapter, was created to share powerful, emotional stories like Margaret's stories of older women who have been forgotten, overlooked, or underestimated, yet who carry within them extraordinary lessons of dignity and hope. Here, every chapter is a reminder that aging is not about fading away, but about reclaiming one's voice, one's independence, and one's joy. If this story touches you, we invite you to be part of our community. Like the video, leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join a circle that believes every elder deserves to live fully. Together, we can make each day a chance to inspire happiness and strength for seniors everywhere. Brookfield, Pennsylvania, 1981. It was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked, where the church bell was the soundtrack of everyday life, and where a convent perched on the hill watched over the valley like a silent guardian. On the night of September 17th, a storm rolled in sheets of rain, thunder cracking like judgment from heaven, the wind bending the trees as though they were kneeling in prayer. That was the night 5 nuns disappeared without a trace. The next morning, the townspeople gathered at the base of St. Catherine of Hope Convent. They pointed toward the windows, dark and silent. Rumors spread like wildfire. They drowned crossing the river. They ran away with men. God himself punished them for secret sins. Some lit candles for our souls. Others whispered that we had betrayed our vows. For 30 years, Brookfield carried this unsolved mystery like a wound that never closed. But tonight, at 72 years old, I, Sister Margaret, will break the silence. For the first time, you will hear the truth from the only living witness willing to speak. I did not die that night. None of us did. We climbed those walls, soaked to the bone, our hearts pounding with terror, and we ran into the storm not to seek freedom, but to escape damnation. I know what people imagine when they think of nuns, quiet women with folded hands, speaking only in prayer, incapable of defiance. And perhaps once, that was true of me. As a girl, I was always the silent observer, the one who noticed details others ignored, the shift of an eye, the tremble in a hand, the crack in a smile. That gift, or curse, is the reason I survived. It is the reason I can tell you now what truly happened behind the convent's stone walls. The truth is not about lost faith. It is not about women who grew restless and longed for the world outside. No, it is about something darker, a shadow that wore holy robes, a predator who used the language of God to mask the hunger of hell. We were not disobedient nuns. We were prisoners, trapped by fear, silenced by authority, erased by the very institution we had devoted our lives to. I remember that storm as if it were still clinging to my skin. The convent halls rattled with every strike of lightning. Sister Claire wept quietly in her cell, clutching her rosary until her knuckles turned white. Sister Anne whispered prayers that trembled on her lips, though we both knew no prayer could silence the footsteps that haunted our nights. Sister Mary stared out the narrow window, her once lively face carved into stone. And Sister Ruth, dear, fragile Ruth, whispered that she would rather die in the mud outside than in the silence of those walls. We made our choice in the darkness, our voices barely audible above the thunder. We would not wait for God or the church to save us. We would save ourselves. And so, we became fugitives not from justice, but from a crime that wore a cassock. That night we stripped away not just our habits, but the illusion that obedience would protect us. For decades, I have carried the weight of silence. Each year, as the storm season returned, the memories bled fresh, the scrape of wet stone under my hands, the sting of broken glass when I pulled myself over the wall, the sound of Claire's sobs swallowed by the wind. We thought if we escaped the convent, we could escape the terror. But the terror followed us into every borrowed name, every false smile, every restless dream. And now people ask me, why speak after 30 years? Why dig up what was buried? Because silence is a coffin, and I refuse to let my sisters remain buried in lies. Because truth is the only prayer left that still feels holy. Because the world must know that we did not vanish into the night out of weakness. We fought for our lives. We fought for our souls. So listen carefully. What I am about to share will unsettle you. It may shake what you believe about faith, about power, about the very people you trust to guard your spirit. But I promise you this, every word I speak is carved from lived terror and earned survival. We did not die in 1981. We did not betray our vows. We escaped from a prison built on fear and disguised as faith. This is not only my confession, it is my testimony. It is my act of defiance, my final offering of truth. And once you know it, you cannot unknow it. If you have ever suspected that some stories are hidden in the shadows, if you believe silence protects only the guilty, then I ask you to stand with me. Leave a comment, subscribe, and share this story, because some truths must be heard no matter how painful they are. Tonight I will open the door to a past long buried, and once opened, it cannot be shut again. St. Catherine of Hope stood proudly on a hill just above the town of Brookfield. Its gray stone walls were softened by ivy, and in the mornings, mist would roll down from the ridge and cover the convent gardens like a veil. From a distance, it looked eternal, untouchable, as if God himself had pressed his hand into the earth and said, "Here, this will be a sanctuary." For me, it was. I arrived at 16, carrying little more than a small suitcase and a heart eager to serve. The convent gave me rhythm, order, and a family I thought I had lost when I left home. Bells marked our days, rising at dawn, prayer in the chapel, work in the gardens, simple meals, evening hymns. Life was predictable, but to my younger self, it felt like a promise of safety. There were 6 of us in total, each different, each essential to the soul of that place. Sister Anne was the sharp one, the thinker. Her eyes missed nothing, and her mind cut through problems like a blade. She always carried a small notebook tucked into her sleeve, scribbling thoughts, verses, and observations. She once told me, "Faith without thought is like a song without words." At first, her seriousness intimidated me, but soon I realized she was the kind of sister who could take chaos and shape it into clarity. Sister Mary was her opposite. Where Anne was precise, Mary was sunlight. She laughed easily, often so loud it echoed down the corridors. Children adored her, and every Sunday after catechism, little hands clung to her habit as if she were a second mother. Her joy seemed inexhaustible. She would say, "A sad saint is a sorry saint," and then burst into giggles that made even the most solemn moments softer. Sister Ruth was the oldest among us, her face lined like a map of years well lived. She ran the kitchen, and the smell of her bread golden crusts, warm and soft inside, was the perfume of our mornings. Ruth never spoke quickly, but when she did, her words carried weight. "Discipline fills the stomach," she liked to say while kneading dough, "but kindness fills the soul." To me, she was a grandmother, steady hands that steadied my own. Sister Claire was the youngest, barely 19 when she arrived. Wide-eyed, shy, and tender as a sparrow, she carried innocence the way others carried armor. She often slipped into the garden to hum hymns while pulling weeds, her voice soft but steady. I took her under my wing, and perhaps in protecting her, I found a purpose I hadn't known I needed. And presiding over us all was Mother Superior Helena. Tall, stern, her voice carried authority, yet her eyes revealed a gentleness she tried to hide. She enforced discipline, early mornings, spotless corridors, silence during meals. But she also checked on us at night, tucking an extra blanket over Claire, offering Ruth a warm hand after long hours in the kitchen. She believed discipline without love was tyranny, and love without discipline was indulgence. In her balance, we found our guide. Those years felt untouched by time. We worked, we prayed. We laughed in the garden when the tomatoes grew too wild, or when Mary tried to teach Ruth a hymn in the wrong key. The convent was not a prison, then it was a cradle, and in that cradle, I allowed myself to believe that holiness would protect us from the storms of the world. Looking back, I see now how easily peace can deceive. It lulls you, makes you believe the walls are unshakable, that evil cannot pass through doors carved with scripture. We were naive, perhaps, but we were also sincere. Every candle we lit in the chapel was a small vow of faith. Every loaf Ruth baked, every lesson Mary taught, every page Anne annotated, it all felt like building blocks of something sacred. For me, those years were a breath before the plunge, though of course I could not have known it then. I remember sitting in the garden one autumn evening, the sky streaked with fire, listening to Claire hum and thinking, if heaven exists, surely it must look like this. And that is why the memory of what came later is so unbearable. Because once you have known such calm, such fragile beauty, the darkness that follows feels even more violent. But I tell you this not to dwell on nostalgia, but so you understand what we lost. You must know who Anne was, so you can grieve when her sharp mind is silenced. You must know Mary's laughter, so you can hear the echo when it fades. You must know Ruth's steady wisdom, Claire's tender hope, Helena's stern love, so that when the storm comes, you feel, as I did, how cruel it is to snuff out such light. At St. Catherine of Hope, before the shadow entered, we believed we were safe. We believed we were untouchable. That belief was the first thing to die. His name was Father Thomas Gregory, and when he first stepped into Brookfield, the townspeople said he looked like he had walked out of a painting. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a baritone voice that filled the sanctuary even when he whispered. His sermons drew crowds from neighboring parishes. Men admired him, women respected him, children stared at him as though he were carved from stone. I remember his first Mass at St. Catherine's. The church pews overflowed, the air thick with incense and expectation. He raised his hands at the altar, and his voice rolled like thunder contained in a human throat. Faith, he said, is not silence, but obedience. True obedience is the highest prayer. The congregation nodded, murmured amen. Even I felt a shiver, though I couldn't tell if it was reverence or unease. At first, life at the convent changed only in small ways. Father Thomas visited often under the guise of pastoral care. He brought us gifts: a new statue for the chapel, books for Anne, seeds for the garden. Mother Helena welcomed him as a shepherd guiding his flock. To the town, his presence was a blessing. To us, he was a new rhythm in our days. But soon, details emerged that unsettled me. During confession, his questions wandered beyond the boundaries of faith. He asked about my childhood, about my body, about thoughts I had never spoken aloud. His tone was calm, almost tender, but his words probed like fingers pressing on a bruise. "Do you ever dream of what lies outside these walls, sister?" he asked once. "Do you imagine yourself touched, not by the spirit, but by flesh?" My throat tightened. I forced the words, "Forgive me, Father, I am here to serve God." He only smiled, as though he knew something I didn't. When he placed his hand on my shoulder after confession, it lingered, too long, a fraction past comfort, a fraction into something else. At first I dismissed it. Perhaps I was imagining, perhaps this was my own weakness, but then I noticed he looked at others the same way. Claire, especially. Sweet, gentle Claire with her eyes wide as the morning sky. She was 19, still new, still tender. Whenever Father Thomas spoke to her, his voice softened unnaturally. His gaze lingered, sweeping from her eyes to her lips, to the curve of her hands as she clutched her rosary. She shrank under his attention, but she said nothing. Silence was her armor. Mary once joked, "The Father looks at Claire as though she were an angel painted on stained glass." She laughed lightly, but there was tension in her smile. Anne caught my eye across the table, her brow furrowed, as if she too had begun to sense the shadow stretching under his robe. The turning point came one late afternoon in the convent library. Rain tapped against the narrow windows, the kind of drizzle that blurred the edges of the world. I entered quietly, searching for a devotional text. That's when I saw them. Claire was pressed against the bookshelf, her face pale, her hands trembling. Father Thomas stood before her, his large frame blocking the aisle. He held her wrist tightly, so tightly her knuckles whitened. His head bent close to hers, his mouth moving with words I couldn't hear. Claire's eyes darted toward me, wide and terrified, and in that instant, I felt my stomach turn to stone. I froze, hidden by the edge of the shelf. My breath caught. My mind screamed at me to move, to speak, to intervene. But fear rooted me to the floor. Seconds felt like hours before he finally released her. Claire stumbled away, clutching her wrist, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Father Thomas adjusted his cassock, smoothed his hair, and walked out as though nothing had happened. I stepped forward only after the door closed. Claire leaned against the wall, sliding down until she crouched on the floor. Her rosary clattered from her hand, beads scattering like lost prayers. I knelt beside her, whispering, "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her silence screamed louder than any words could. That night, I lay awake, the storm inside me louder than any thunder outside. My thoughts collided. Is this a test from God? A cross I must carry silently? Or have I just witnessed the devil himself draped in holy cloth? I pressed my palms together, but no prayer would form. All I could see was Claire's face in the library, caught between innocence and terror, and Father Thomas's hand clamped around her wrist like a shackle. And for the first time since I entered the convent, I felt fear not of the world outside, but of the world within. The first crack in our fragile sanctuary came quietly. Mother Superior Helena fell ill that winter. At first it was a cough that clung to her at night, echoing down the stone hallways. Soon it was fever, then days spent in bed, her once commanding voice reduced to whispers. The woman who had been our anchor, strict, steady, protective, was now as frail as parchment. Without her presence, the convent felt suddenly unguarded, exposed to a wind we could not yet name. It was then that Father Thomas's shadow lengthened. He came more often, under the pretense of ministering to Helena. He strode through the halls as though they were his own, offering blessings that lingered too long, asking questions that twisted beneath the surface of faith. Claire withered before our eyes. Her cheeks hollowed, her hands trembled when she reached for the chalice. She no longer hummed in the garden. She moved like a ghost, her rosary beads clinking nervously between her fingers. Each morning her eyes were rimmed red, though she never admitted why. Mary, once the soul of laughter, grew quiet. The children still adored her, but her smile no longer reached her eyes. I found her one evening staring out the window, lips pressed tight. "What troubles you?" I asked. She only shook her head. "Nothing," she murmured, but her silence screamed louder than confession. Inside me, a storm brewed. Every instinct told me something unspeakable was unfolding, yet I felt powerless. If I accused him without proof, who would believe me? A silent nun against a priest with a booming voice and a sterling reputation. It was Anne who finally broke my paralysis. One night, I found her in the library, her small notebook open, quill scratching across the page. Candlelight carved shadows into her sharp features. "I saw him again," I whispered. Her eyes flicked up. "With Claire?" I nodded. "She won't speak of it. Mary won't either. But it's there, Anne. It's in their eyes." Anne set down the quill, folding her hands with deliberate calm. "Margaret," she said, her tone low but unyielding, "words will not save us. Not yours, not mine, not even Claire's." I blinked at her, stung. "But if we tell Mother Helena—" "She is dying," Anne interrupted. "Even if she weren't, would she stand against him? Against the church that placed him here?" Her words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. My faith wavered like the flame between us. Anne leaned closer, her voice a whisper heavy with steel. "We need proof. Cold, undeniable proof. Otherwise, our voices are nothing but whispers drowned by his thunder." I stared at her, my heart pounding. Proof. The word itself felt dangerous, as though saying it aloud could summon his wrath. "But how?" I asked. Anne's eyes glinted, determined. "By watching, by recording, by refusing to look away." That night, as I lay in my narrow bed, I wrestled with her words. Proof. The idea filled me with dread, yet also with a spark of purpose. It was a seed planted in soil already rich with fear. I thought of Claire, shrinking day by day, her innocence devoured by silence. I thought of Mary, her laughter stolen, her light dimmed. I thought of Ruth, too old and too tired to fight, kneading bread while shadows gathered at her back. And I thought of Helena, gasping in her bed, unable to defend the daughters she had once shepherded. Was this then what faith demanded? Not blind obedience, but the courage to confront evil even when it wore holy robes. I pressed my palms together in the dark, but no prayer came. Only Anne's words echoed in my mind. We need proof. Words will not save us. It was in that moment I realized our lives had changed forever. The peace we once knew was gone. In its place grew suspicion, fear, and the faint outline of resistance. I did not yet know that this was the beginning of the end, the first step toward a night of storm and flight, the first ripple in a tide that would sweep away everything we loved. But I felt it. Deep in my bones, I felt it. Faith had not abandoned us, but it was no longer enough to shield us. It was now a test, one that demanded more than prayers, one that demanded the truth, no matter the cost. From the moment Anne spoke of proof, my hands no longer felt idle. I began to write. By candlelight after evening prayers, I recorded everything. Dates, gestures, words spoken too close to the ear. Each page became both a shield and a weapon. My quill scratched furiously while fear pressed against my ribs. Sometimes I trembled so hard that the ink blotted, but I kept going. I noted the way Claire flinched whenever Father Thomas entered a room. I wrote of Mary's sudden silence, how her laughter had been replaced by bitten lips. I described how Ruth's hands shook when she carried trays of bread after he lingered too long in the kitchen doorway, and I wrote of my own dread, how confession had become an interrogation, how his touch lingered like a stain I could not wash away. Weeks turned into months. Mother Superior Helena's condition worsened. She coughed blood into her handkerchief, her voice fading to a whisper that carried no weight in the face of Father Thomas's booming authority. The walls that had once held safety now echoed with menace. Finally, I could bear it no longer. Clutching my notebook, I asked for permission to travel to Scranton to secure medicinal supplies for Helena. Permission was granted God's hand, I thought. Instead of turning toward the market, I boarded a bus heading east, my pulse racing as each mile carried me farther from the convent. The diocesan office loomed solemn in Scranton, its marble facade and towering crucifix promising sanctuary. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the measured footsteps of priests. I waited for 3 hours, my palms damp around my notebook, until the bishop's secretary ushered me into his chamber. Bishop Lawrence sat behind a wide oak desk, his silver hair gleaming under the lamplight. He looked at me with the heavy patience of a man used to hearing confessions, used to being believed. "Speak, sister," he said. My voice trembled, but I forced the words. I told him everything, the questions in the confessional, the lingering touches, Claire's terror, Mary's silence, the wrist I saw gripped in the library. I placed my notebook before him, its pages trembling like my hands. When I finished, silence filled the room. At last he sighed and leaned back in his chair. His gaze was steady, but cold. "Sister Margaret," he said slowly, "you are accusing a priest who has served his flock with dignity. Father Thomas is considered exemplary. To speak such words is to commit grave sin." My throat tightened. "Exemplary, he is destroying us. Please, Your Excellency, the others are suffering. I fear for their souls, our souls." His hand lifted, cutting me off. "You are mistaken, or perhaps confused. It is not unusual for women in convents to misinterpret guidance. What you suggest is slander." His eyes hardened. "You must repent for these impure thoughts." The words struck like ice water. Impure thoughts. He did not see me as a witness. He saw me as a sinner. I pleaded once more, my voice breaking. "If you do nothing," he will not stop. He closed the notebook, pushing it back across the desk. Go home, sister. Pray for forgiveness. And speak of this to no one. The door closed behind me, and with it, the last sliver of hope. When I returned to Brookfield, the air itself seemed heavier. I had done everything I could, yet nothing had changed. Worse, something had shifted. Father Thomas greeted me the next day with a smile that chilled my blood. As I passed him in the corridor, he leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. God punishes liars, sister, he whispered, especially liars who think they can defy his chosen. My knees weakened. The bishop had told him. My secret plea had become his weapon. 2 mornings later, Helena summoned me to her chamber. Her voice was frail, but her words cut like knives. I have received instructions from the bishop. You are to be transferred immediately to a convent in Montana, effective at once. I tried to speak, but her thin hand rose, silencing me. Tears rimmed her eyes, whether from illness or disappointment, I could not tell. Transferred, cast out, silenced. That night, I sat in the dark chapel, staring at the crucifix. Is this faith? I whispered. To be abandoned by those who claim to serve you? To be punished for telling the truth? The only answer was the echo of my own voice against stone. And the door had closed, and with it, the world I thought I knew. The church, my protector, had turned its back. Father Thomas stood stronger than ever, cloaked not just in holy robes, but in the approval of those who should have defended us. And in that moment, despair wrapped itself around me. For the first time, I wondered if God himself had left us. The order for my transfer to Montana was the spark that lit the fire. That night, after the evening prayers, I found myself in the cellar among crates of potatoes and jars of preserves. One by one, the others came. Anne, Mary, Claire, and finally Ruth, her hands trembling from the chill and from something deeper. We formed a circle, 5 shadows in a place meant for storage, whispering as if the walls themselves were spies. I've been here 60 years, Ruth began, her voice shaking like a candle flame. I thought I would die inside these walls, be buried under the chapel floor like the sisters before me. But now, she paused, looking at each of us with watery eyes. Now I think God may want me to die out there rather than die in sin here. Better to leave with a clean soul than to stay and be complicit. Her words hung heavy in the air. Mary pressed a fist to her mouth to stifle a sob. Claire stared at the floor, rosary dangling from her fingers like a lifeline. Anne's eyes were sharp, but even she seemed to struggle for breath. I swallowed hard. If I go to Montana, nothing changes. He'll still be here, you'll still be here, and who knows what he'll do next. Anne's voice cut through the dark. Then we can't let you go alone. A silence followed. No one moved, as though speaking aloud might bring Father Thomas storming down the stairs. Finally, Mary whispered, "Run. But where? We have no money, no family, no one to protect us." It was Claire who surprised us. Her small voice broke the quiet. "We have Mr. Miller." We all looked at her. Henry Miller, the local farmer who delivered vegetables twice a week, a man of few words and calloused hands. He had been coming to the convent for years. He was polite, almost shy, and had never once looked at us the way Father Thomas did. "What makes you think he would help?" Anne asked. Claire hesitated, then said, "Because he once told me his daughter joined a convent up north. Something bad happened there. He didn't say what, but his eyes," she swallowed, "his eyes were like mine." A long breath escaped Ruth. Perhaps God has already sent us a sign, and we've been too afraid to see it. That night we planned. Whispering over the smell of damp earth, we sketched a path to freedom. I would approach Mr. Miller discreetly. If he refused, nothing would be lost. If he agreed, everything would change. 2 days later, as he unloaded crates of potatoes at the back door, I murmured, "We need help." For a moment he froze. Then he wiped his hands on his trousers and said softly, "Tell me when and where." From then on, our secret had an accomplice. Notes tucked inside sacks of carrots, a rope ladder hidden beneath bales of hay, a cousin with a remote cabin across state lines who owed him a favor. Each message was like a tiny bridge spanning the abyss between hope and despair. As the appointed night approached, fear clung to us like a second habit. We moved through our daily chores as usual, baking bread, teaching catechism, tending the garden, while beneath the surface, our hearts raced. Ruth began setting aside small loaves wrapped in cloth. Anne retrieved our birth certificates from the archives. Mary and I gathered plain clothes. Claire collected the medications Helena no longer used. The night came cloaked in thunder. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the windows like impatient fists. The convent bell tolled midnight, each chime vibrating through my bones. In the cellar, we stripped off our habits and folded them neatly, as though leaving behind not just garments, but identities. I looked at the others, Anne's jaw tight, Mary's hands trembling, Claire pale but resolute, Ruth clutching a small bag to her chest and whispered, "We are not nuns tonight. We are women fighting for our lives." We moved through the pantry to the rear courtyard. The rain soaked us instantly. The wall loomed ahead, high and jagged, glass embedded along its crest like teeth. But near the oak tree, the stones crumbled as Mr. Miller had described. A rope ladder hung from the branches, swaying in the wind. Anne climbed first, nimble despite the downpour. Mary followed, whispering prayers under her breath. Claire went third, slipping once but regaining her grip. When it was Ruth's turn, she hesitated. "I can't," she gasped. "My hands—" "You can," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Take my arm." She reached for me, her weight pulling at my shoulder as she tried to hoist herself. Pain shot up my arm. I thought I felt something snap. The world narrowed to rain, stone, and Ruth's frightened eyes. With a final heave, I dragged her over the edge, my own knees scraping against broken glass. We tumbled to the other side, soaked, trembling, and bleeding. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Ruth began to sob, not from pain but from release. We ran through the dark field, mud sucking at our shoes, thunder drowning our footsteps. Ahead, headlights flickered once Mr. Miller's signal. His old truck waited behind a line of pines, engine running, a tarp in the back. He opened the door without a word, his face grim but determined. 3 of us squeezed into the cab. Mary and I climbed into the bed, pulling the tarp over us. As the truck lurched forward, I pressed my hand to my throbbing shoulder and looked back. The convent silhouette, blurred by rain, receded into darkness. It felt like a funeral and a resurrection at once. We had buried the women we were, and in their place, 5 fugitives had been born. Ohio did not welcome us so much as swallow us whole. That was what we needed. In Cleveland's gray sprawl, where smokestacks stitched dusk to the horizon and buses breathed steam into winter air, we could become no one. We rented a narrow house with peeling paint and a porch that sagged like an old back. We practiced our new names until they stopped cutting our tongues. Linda, me, Catherine, Anne, Rose, Mary, Emily, Claire, and Millie, Ruth. We taped the names to our bedroom doors like labels on unfamiliar instruments, learning the sounds we were supposed to make. The factory took us in because factories ask few questions. Rows of machines pounded like iron hearts, needles stitching the same straight lines over and over until time lost its edges. I learned to feed fabric to a humming singer, to chase the thread when it snapped, to keep my hands moving, even when my mind drifted back to stone corridors and thunder. Noise became our sanctuary. In noise, memories cannot whisper. Living outside was another education. Once, I stood at a payphone with a slip of paper in my palm and quarters sweating in my fist. I pressed the wrong sequence, twice, then stood listening to a robot voice I could not outwait. A man in a suit hovered behind me with a sigh large enough to fill the booth. "You gotta dial the area code first," he said, impatient, as if I'd arrived from a century instead of a town away. I nodded, blushing, grateful for the glass walls that hid my shaking. The grocery store was worse, fluorescent aisles that went on like roads, cereal boxes shouting from both sides, fruit piled into impossible pyramids. Rosemary stared at a wall of milk with dates stamped like tiny prophecies. "Which one is right?" she whispered. We clutched a cart like a shared walker and studied strangers, mimicking the way they weighed oranges, the way they chose bread, the way they laughed at nothing. In those early weeks, the smallest tasks became trials: crossing an intersection, counting change, opening a bank account. I learned to sign Linda Peterson with a hand that did not look like mine. Emily, our Claire, learned the bus routes by tracing the map with her finger every night, lips moving silently as if in prayer. And Catherine Ann kept a notebook filled with rigid, comforting lists: rent due dates, grocery staples, the names of streets we could safely take home after dark. On nights when fear pressed too hard on our chests, when we jumped at the sound of a door slamming 2 houses down, Anne would gather us in the small kitchen with its chipped laminate table. Steam rose from our chipped mugs like something being released. She would speak softly, as if to a room full of skittish birds. "We will learn this," she said. "We will learn again from the beginning, like children. But at least we are free." The way she said free made silence tilt toward hope. Work steadied us. Routine built scaffolding where faith had once stood. Millie Ruth found her rhythm in the factory's breakroom oven, bringing rolls on Fridays the way she used to feed the town from our convent kitchen. Men who never looked anyone in the eye looked up when they smelled her bread. She smiled shyly, as if forgiven. The years turned, quiet and merciless. 1985 arrived with black ice and a thin sun. One afternoon, Millie did not come back from the restroom. We found her on the tile, her hand curled as if kneading a loaf that was not there. In the ambulance's siren, I heard the convent bell, tolling a name the world did not know. The funeral was small. The priest mispronounced Amelia Peterson, and no one corrected him. I stood by the grave and spoke to Ruth in the language only the dead understand. "Your hands are clean. We got you over the wall. God saw." The ground accepted her without asking for her real name. After Ruth, we clung harder to work. Catherine's competence was noticed. She rose to floor supervisor, then learned payroll because numbers were honest in ways people often were not. Rose mastered quality control, catching flaws with eyes that once watched children as they recited catechism. Emily learned to stitch at speed, quiet and precise, hands moving like she was still counting beads. We made friends carefully. A neighbor named Deanna taught us to winterize windows. A cashier started setting aside day-old bread. We never invited anyone too far in. Our new lives were houses we lived in without locking the doors from the inside. If someone knocked too hard, the walls might remember they used to be a cloister and fall quiet forever. Some nights, laughter returned in pockets. Rose found a radio station that played songs from the years we had missed. Drum beats and longing. Voices that told us a world existed where women spoke loudly into microphones and no one shushed them. We learned to bake birthday cakes from boxed mixes, to sing off-key, to light candles without thinking of altars. Then 1996 came like a slow shadow. Catherine began to cough and pretended it was nothing. She wore tiredness like an extra garment, heavy and invisible. By the time a doctor named it, the word cancer had already moved in and arranged the furniture. The hospital had long halls and a plastic smell. We took turns sitting in chairs designed to make penitence seem comfortable. One evening, when the fluorescent lights hummed too loud, Anne squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "If I go," she said, "the promise does not. Do you hear me, Margaret?" I wanted to say no one calls me that anymore, but the name returned like a home key under the mat. I nodded. She closed her eyes and looked for a moment, not like a patient, but like a general who had chosen the battleground. We buried Catherine under a maple tree that went red in October. The headstone said what the world would accept. My heart said what it could bear. "I will carry the book when you cannot." Grief rearranged us again. Emily married a kind man from the shipping dock who never asked too many questions and always warmed the car before winter shifts. She learned how to smile without flinching, Sometimes she even laughed the way young women do when they believe in spring. Watching her cradle her first child, I felt something soft and terrible. Relief that one life had changed course, and envy at how hope dared to bloom in soil we had salted with fear. We worked, we paid bills, we kept holidays small and gentle, and then 2004 stole quietly to the table and blew out another candle. Rose's heart failed in her sleep. The doctor said it was merciful. Mercy is a word that gets thinner the more it is used. I sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the dent her body left in the pillow, as if the world had looked away 1 second too long and misplaced her. After the third funeral, the house learned to echo. Drawers slid too loudly. The hallway light clicked like a metronome in an empty chapel. Emily visited often with the baby, then 2, then 3. She brought noise, which is to say, life. I smiled for her and kept the notebook of our expenses in perfect order, as if balancing columns could keep the past from tipping. Loss did not make the promise lighter. It made it heavier, as if every name carved into my memory added another stone to the pack I carried. Sometimes on the bus home from the factory, I would see my reflection in the window, and the glass would hesitate between Linda and Margaret, between the woman who ran and the woman who must one day turn and face the thing that chased her. Anne's words returned whenever doubt tried to bargain. We will learn again from the beginning like children, but at least we are free. Freedom had cost us names, homes, and 3 graves that did not tell the truth. What remained was work, breath, and a duty that grew louder each time the world fell quiet. By then I understood. Hiding is not the same as healing. Hiding keeps you alive. Healing asks you to live. And every year that passed in Ohio, every pay stub and grocery list pushed me closer to the moment when hiding would no longer be possible. The promise was not a memory. It was a clock, and the hands were moving. The night I found Anne's notebook, sleep had refused me like a locked door. The house was quiet in that way only winter houses can be, pipes ticking, the refrigerator humming a thin, lonely hymn. I went looking for a blanket in the hall closet and instead brushed my hand against a shoebox I didn't recognize. Inside, a rosary wrapped in brown paper, a folded scarf that still remembered her perfume, and beneath them a leather-bound book the color of old tea. My chest tightened. I knew before I opened it that it would feel like opening a wound that had scabbed over too soon. Anne's handwriting was there, the narrow, disciplined strokes I had seen on grocery lists and factory schedules. Only here the ink felt different, pressed deeper, as if every letter had been anchored against forgetting. I sat at the small kitchen table, turned on the lamp, and let her voice rise from the page. At first the entries were clinical, almost austere dates, times, locations. April 12, 1981, Claire emerged from the confessional shaking. Questioning exceeded spiritual scope. Advised rest. Observed redness around eyes. May 3, 1981, Mary's wrist bruised. Claims fall. Pattern resembles finger pressure, not impact. Logged. June 14, 1981, prolonged visit after Compline. Father in library with Claire, door ajar, tone low, witnessed proximity, intervention risked escalation, logged. I could see her, hunched at the desk by candlelight in the library we loved, turning fear into record. She wasn't writing feelings, she was building a case brick by brick, a wall that might stand when our bodies could not. The next pages changed temperature. Paper clips held carbon copies of letters, names redacted with careful strokes, but the bones intact. A letter from a former superior to the diocese. Concerns regarding pastoral boundaries, request discreet reassignment. Across the margin, in blue pencil, a single line. Matter resolved internally. Beneath, a diocesan stamp. Received, followed by a date 2 years before we fled. My hands trembled. We had spent years asking ourselves if we had misread the storm. Here, stamped and initialed, was thunder on official letterhead. There were initials of women we never met, SLM. With brief notes that read like epitaphs. Left abruptly, ongoing spiritual distress, refuses confession. Parish names, days of the week. the shape of a pattern no one wanted to see until it was almost all that remained. Anne's voice, between the lines, began to show through. She allowed herself small bursts of feeling, caged in brackets like dangerous animals. If we do not speak, our silence will become his alibi. Truth decays when stored too long in a dark drawer. I turned a page and found a slip of onion skin paper taped to the margin. It was a copy of a memo, 2 sentences, 4 signatures. In light of recent concerns, recommend reassignment after summer. No public action. Beneath the tape, in Anne's hand, they will move him, they will not stop him. I kept reading until the kitchen clock forgot to tick. The entries grew closer together as we neared September 1981, as if time itself had shortened to a hallway where footsteps pursued us. Then came the page that split the world into before and after. It was dated in her careful way, October 2nd, 1996, a week before the ambulance lights painted our living room. The ink was darker, the pen had bitten the paper. Grace, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. Do not let us die in silence. Do not allow our names to vanish under the dust of your good manners and the church's good reputation. Wait until he is too old to harm, until the tide has turned, until other voices gather with yours. Then tell it all: dates, rooms, letters, names, the ones I marked and the ones you remember at 3 a.m. Do not make a shrine of your fear. Do not confuse discretion with virtue. When the moment is given, break the glass. Don't let us die in silence. When he is too old to hurt, speak the truth. I pressed the page flat with both palms as if it might otherwise fly away. The lamp haloed the words. The room seemed to lean toward them. Don't let us die in silence. I heard Ruth's steady hands in the kitchen, Mary's laughter swallowed mid-echo, Claire's rosary beads clicking like rain on stone. I heard my own breath hitch and remembered the wall, the rope burning my palms, the sensation of something tearing that night habit, name, future. I turned more pages and found a small envelope glued to the back cover. Inside were 3 parish bulletin clippings, tiny celebrations of him, anniversaries, fundraisers, a photograph with a mayor whose smile now felt obscene. On the reverse, Anne had written, "Sunlight is not proof of innocence. Sometimes it's only the weather." When I finally closed the notebook, the kitchen felt both too small and too sacred for what I was holding. I wanted to pray, but the words that came were not petition, they were pledge. For years I had told myself the promise at her bedside was a relic, softened by time, excusable by kindness. A memory you keep on a shelf where it can't cut you. But this was not memory. It was marching orders written in a hand I loved more than my fear. I whispered, afraid to wake the sleeping house, afraid to wake a sleeping God. "Anne, I hear you." My voice wavered, then steadied. "I will not let us die in silence. I will wait for the moment you described. And when it comes, I will break the glass." Outside, a bus sighed past like a tired animal. Somewhere, a radiator clanged. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary night. And yet nothing was ordinary anymore, because the book lay on the table like a lit coal, and I was done pretending my hands were too fragile to hold it. I breathed in slowly, as if testing new lungs. The faces of the women I had loved hovered at the edge of the lamp's circle. Ruth with flour on her cheek. Mary, mid-laugh. Claire, finally sleeping without flinching. Anne, head bent over the very pages that now burned in my keeping. The thought formed clean as a blade. The promise is not a keepsake. It is a command. And commands once heard insist. By 2011, I was 72, my hair silver and my hands marked by the years of work and loss. I had lived 3 decades under borrowed names, but Anne's words still burned in my chest. Don't let us die in silence. The promise no longer felt like memory. It was command, pulsing like a second heartbeat. That was the year I heard about Father John Whitaker, a new priest assigned to Havenwood. He was young, barely in his 30s, and unlike the men of the old order, he spoke of compassion, justice, and listening. Parishioners whispered that he defended the poor even when it angered donors. They called him reckless. I called him a possibility. I traveled back with Eleanor's Ann's journal hidden in the lining of my bag. Each mile toward Havenwood felt like walking back into the fire we had fled. When I stepped into his office, he looked at me as though trying to place a face he had never seen. "My name is Grace," I said, my voice shaking. "Sister Grace, from St. Catherine's of Hope, one of the nuns who vanished in 1981. His eyes widened. "That's impossible. They said you were—" He stopped, searching my lined face. "They said you were dead." "Dead is what they wanted us to be," I whispered. "But I lived. And now you need to hear why we ran." At first, his posture stiffened, doubt flickering. I told him of the storm, the ropes, the walls. His jaw tightened. I told him of Claire's tears, Mary's silence, Ruth's breaking body. He looked down at his folded hands as though they held a weight too great. And then, slowly, I slid Anne's notebook across the desk. "Read this," I said. He opened it, turning the fragile pages with careful fingers. His lips moved as he read, and I watched shock bleed into grief. When he reached the final entry, his hand trembled. He closed the book and looked at me, his eyes glassy. "God forgive us," he said. "I believe you." The words pierced me. After 30 years of disbelief and exile, someone in a collar, someone inside the church, believed, but belief was not enough. Father John insisted the truth had to be spoken, not just kept in hidden notebooks. A plan formed. I would testify at the town hall, and he would stand beside me. I feared the backlash more than the escape itself, but silence was no longer an option. When the night came, the hall was packed. I stood at the front, knees weak, palms damp. Faces from my past, aged, lined, wary, stared back. I began to speak, my voice unsteady at first, then stronger with every sentence. I told them about Father Thomas Gregory, about the nights of fear, about the bishop who called me a liar. Murmurs spread through the room. Some crossed their arms, anger etched on their faces. Others looked down, ashamed. When I held up Anne's journal, the hall went still, and then it broke, half the room shouting, half clapping. One man called me a fraud. Another muttered that I was senile. My heart pounded, my throat burned. I thought I would faint. Then, from the back of the room, a woman stood. Her voice, though trembling, cut through the noise. "I believe her," she said, "because I was one of them. I was a girl here too, and he hurt me." Silence fell like a curtain. Then another woman rose, and then another, their voices cracking but clear. "Me too." He did the same to me. "I never told anyone, but I can't stay quiet anymore." The tide turned in that instant. The weight of our collective silence shattered, and truth spilled into the hall, raw and undeniable. Even those who resisted shifted uneasily in their seats, forced to face what had been buried too long. I felt tears streak down my face, not only for myself, but for every voice that had been locked behind stone walls. For the first time since that stormy night in 1981, we were not fugitives. We were survivors standing together. Father John stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "The time of silence is over," he said. And I knew he was right. If you believe the truth must be spoken, show your voice by commenting "I believe" below. Each word is a light against the dark, proof that we are no longer alone. The investigation did not roar so much as grind forward, slow and relentless, like a millstone that had finally remembered its duty. Witnesses came, some trembling, some furious, some speaking as if each word had to be wrestled out of a long winter. Documents surfaced, letters that once slept in drawers woke to their own shame. The diocese could not contain what the town now knew by heart. When the decree arrived, it was brief, almost clinical. Thomas Gregory was laicized, stripped of the vestments that had once made him untouchable. There would be no cell, no sentencing gavel, because time had sealed certain doors the law could no longer open. But something colder than prison waited. And he left Brookfield quietly, taken to a nursing home 3 states away. Word reached us in fragments: a small room with a window that faced a parking lot, a television that talked to no one, a tray where soup cooled untouched. When the call came years later, "He died last night," no one knew who had stood at the foot of his bed. Perhaps no one had. I did not rejoice. The feeling was stranger than triumph, softer than grief. It was the sound of a page turning because it must. We returned to the hill. Senbel. Catherine of Hope had stood through all of it, through our vows and our flight and our long silence, and now it stood again, emptied of its old secret. The town voted, grants were written, hands were raised, stones were scrubbed, windows mended. The chapel's cracked floor took on a new shine. The kitchen woke first, as kitchens do. Within a year, the sign over the gate changed: St. Catherine's Center for Women. What was once seclusion became shelter. The bell that had once called us to obedience now called strangers to safety. We hired counselors and lawyers. A social worker carved a small office out of the old sacristy and decorated it with crayons and courage. The dormitory that had housed our narrow beds became rooms with quilts made by church ladies whose hands finally had something holy to do. The garden that once fed a parish now fed a network of women learning, step by small step, to trust a morning again. They came in waves: a waitress with bruises measured in shades of yellow and green, a graduate student who hadn't laughed in a year, a grandmother who brought her granddaughter and left her own fear in a paper bag by the door. They told stories in pieces, some too jagged for whole sentences. We learned to listen the way we had once learned to pray, often and without flinching. We did more than listen. Papers were filed. Orders were granted. A locksmith became our most faithful donor. On Thursdays, the chapel hosted a circle where women practiced saying no out loud until the word stopped sounding like blasphemy. Emily Sweet Clare moved back to Brookfield after her husband passed. She did not return as a penitent, but as a teacher, the sort of woman who could sit beside a trembling 20-year-old and turn panic into breathing. Children trailed her down the hallways like sparrows behind breadcrumbs. She laughed again, the sound careful at first, then warming, like sunlight gradually deciding a room is worth the trouble. In time, we counted the lives touched not by rumor, but by record. Hundreds, then thousands of women crossed that threshold. They arrived with nothing and left with keys, jobs, custody papers, diplomas, scar cream, small plants, phone numbers that would answer at midnight. Sometimes a woman would return months later with a cake she had baked, the frosting imperfect and brave. She would cry. We would cry. The bell would ring, not for ritual, but for arrival. Old age found us gently. I bought a little bungalow within walking distance of the center, a place with a narrow porch and a stubborn rosebush. Emily lived 2 streets over. Our grandchildren hers by blood, mine by stubborn adoption of the heart-filled Sundays with a chaos that felt like a second baptism. They asked why my hands were so wrinkled. I told them it was from holding too many stories. They asked why the building on the hill had such tall windows. I told them the light likes to visit where it was once refused. Some evenings, when the center had grown quiet and the staff had gone home, I walked the old cloister alone. Echoes still lived there, but they no longer frightened me. On the west lawn, we had set 5 stone benches facing the town. Each bore a name that once belonged to a habit and now belonged to a history: Ruth, Anne, Mary, Claire, Grace. Women sometimes sat on them between appointments, laying down whatever they had carried up the hill. Once, I found a small bouquet of roadside daisies on Mary. I took one and pressed it between the pages of Anne's notebook, the paper crinkling like contentment. Near dusk, the benches glowed like low-lit altars. I would rest on mine and watch the rooflines of Brookfield soften, the streetlights blink awake one by one, the center's front door open and close, the rhythm of a place that knows how to keep breathing. On one of those evenings, the air was so still that even the bell hesitated. I put my palm against the carved letters of my own name and felt, for the first time, not the chill of stone, but the warmth of something answered. "We did not die for nothing," I whispered. "We did not die at all." The wind moved the maple leaves as if in reply. People ask me, even now, what faith means after all of this. They expect an answer polished by certainty. I cannot give them that. Faith to me is no longer obedience without breath. It is the stubborn insistence that truth belongs in daylight. It is the audacity to question a voice simply because it is amplified. It is the work of naming harm without mistaking forgiveness for permission. True faith is not a locked gate. It is a door held open for those still running. Sometimes I think of Thomas Gregory in that small room, of the bell that no longer rang for him, of the window that faced only a parking lot. I do not pity him. Pity is not required. Understanding is, power borrowed from holiness will always come due. What endures is not who preached the loudest, but who loved the longest, and whether the love made room for freedom. Years turn. The center's paint chips, volunteers repaint it, grants lapse, more arrive. The bell rusts, we polish it. Survivors keep coming, and so do their victories, messy, incomplete, sufficient. On the anniversary of our opening, the mayor who once avoided eye contact stood on the steps and cried. Emily squeezed my hand. I felt the bones of time and the softness that survives it. Before we left that night, I walked again to the benches. The sky had gone the blue of old denim. I sat and traced each name the way a person reads Braille. Ruth, whose bread was courage disguised as crust. Anne, who taught me that truth is a ledger. Mary, who proved laughter is a sacrament. Claire, who learned to sleep without flinching. Grace, who learned her own. The town lights flickered, and somewhere a woman laughed, unafraid. We did not die in vain, I said, and the words did not tremble. We did not die at all. The bell agreed, and the hill, at last, felt holy. Closing words. Stories like mine are not only about the past. They are about every woman, every man, every elder who has carried silence too long. What happened on that stormy night in 1981, what followed across decades of hiding, grief, and finally justice, none of it belongs only to me. It belongs to all of us who have ever been told to stay quiet, who have been asked to trade truth for safety, who have felt faith tested not by God, but by people who misused His name. When I sit now on the stone bench with the names of my sisters, I no longer see only loss. I see a living legacy. Ruth, Anne, Mary, Claire. They are with me in the laughter of the women who walk out of the St. Catherine Center with new keys in their hands. They are with me in the voices of survivors who dare to say, "Me too." They are with me in every whisper turned into a declaration, every broken silence that becomes a hymn of survival. And so I say this to you not as a nun, not as a fugitive, but as a woman who finally found her voice. Do not let your story stay hidden. Speak it, write it, sing it, whisper it to one friend if that is all you can do. Truth grows when it is shared, and each voice added makes the chorus stronger. If my journey has touched you, I ask you gently, from the heart, to take part in this work. Leave a comment and tell us where you are listening from, or simply write, "I believe." If you, too, believe silence must never win. Press like if you want this story to reach others who may need it tonight. Share it with someone who carries their own unspoken burden. And please, subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so you will hear the next story as soon as it is ready. For there are many more lives, many more truths, waiting to be honored. Life is precious. Truth is powerful, and your voice, yes, even yours can change the world. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing, and may we all find the courage to live our final chapters not in fear, but in freedom.